So thanks for coming. I appreciate the people who are here. The last time we did this was right before Rasmea Odeh's sentencing. And I think you know the basics of the case, or that she's a 68-year-old Palestinian woman. She just celebrated a birthday, so she's probably 69 now. And you know, as a child, her family was in the late 40s, was in a village that was attacked and removed by Zionists from Europe. You know, they militarily attacked where she lived, and they lost their house and had to move to another part of Palestine. And then in the late 60s, during another war, it happened to her family again. So as a little girl it happened, and then as a young student, you know, a late teens student. So she's like, in a way, represents the story of the Palestinians being ethnically cleansed and removed. So she became part of the, Palestinian liberation movement, and eventually during that war, their house was destroyed for a second time, and so then she was captured by the Israeli military, and they tortured her, they raped her in prison, and she was found guilty in their military court of occupation. So it's an occupation army and a military court. And they have a very good record of convicting. They convict everybody that comes before them. And that's how it works. And there's no second guessing it, and there's no appeal, So everyone who goes into that court is guilty and put in prison. She was released 10 years later in a negotiation. And, she eventually came to the U.S. in the 90s to take care of her father, who was dying of cancer. And her brother lived here and ran a restaurant in Detroit. So she, 10 years ago, got citizenship. And she went through that whole process, and the U.S. government officials, some at a very high level in the embassies and consulates, helped her to do it. And all of a sudden, a few years ago, they said, wait a minute, you're this woman who was in prison and we're going to deport you. So they put her on trial, and it's for a very minor immigration violation. But, the prosecution and them, they were asking for long sentences initially. So in the court, she wasn't allowed to talk about the trial. She wasn't allowed to talk about the torture. There were all these rules that were put on her. And at the same time, you witnessed this at the jury selection, and then during the trial, the judge keeps mentioning a bombing, right? Says, well, there was a bombing and 2 people died. And he kept bringing it up. Hello.
Hello.
Come on in. This is Rich. And so they, so it really prejudiced the jury towards what this is about, So it's okay, we'll clean it up later. She was found guilty, and the judge sentenced her to 18 months and then to deportation. So that's where we're at today.
Where is this bombing bit coming from?
Well, during the war, when the Israelis decided to take more of Palestine and occupy it, there was a war against that occupation. And so there were many attacks at the time, but in particular, they charged her with the attack at a grocery store that killed 2 young men, I believe, who were, pro-Israeli Zionists, and that's what it was in a time of war. So, would you like to say anything about the trial or the?
I don't really have anything to add. Like you said, it was very seemingly one-sided. The judge didn't keep saying, all the questions he asked the jurors were like, would you be able to continue to serve in this? There's a bomb, someone died. And just very probing like that. And at the same time, she wasn't really able to speak about her own experience at all. And experts the types of things that she went to weren't allowed to speak either. So it was kind of just, that's how it went.
So Homeland Security are the ones who ran the investigation and then started this trial. And they had one witness who was Palestinian that they didn't call. And she was a woman who was in that same prison with Rasmea. And the reason they didn't call her is there's a key question. She was asked if she had ever seen her or met her in the prison. And she said, I only saw her once when a door opened and I saw she was strapped in a chair with electric wires connected to her. And so the prosecution didn't want to call her as a witness. So that's kind of, how things got presented was, this is a woman who cheated the system. That's how it was presented to the jury.
She's a threat somehow.
And then the implication is, she was involved in the bombings back in Israel. And another interesting thing about the jury selection was the trial was in Detroit, and people know the demographics of Detroit. It's a African American city. There were two alternate jurors were African American, and I believe one other juror. So they picked the jurors from other areas who tended to be white and upper middle class or middle class. And
there wasn't an Arab on the...
no Arabs, no South Asians, no Muslims were on the jury. In a city that has all of those. They also ask, are you a member of a union? And they tend to not want union members on the jury. I'm not saying it's a rule, but they tend to, the prosecution and the defense both get to kind of knock people off the process. But they ended up, I think, with a very sympathetic jury to the prosecution, to the U.S. government's point of view. And, the attack on Rasmea is an attack on the people organizing against war in the United States and also organizing for immigrants and the rights of immigrants. And that's how we've seen it. So I think we're going to start in a minute.
Hello, everyone. And thank you so much for getting together tonight in a number of different cities to get an update on my case. I'm so grateful for the support and for so much of the time and effort that you dedicated to the case since my arrest in October 2013. Your support gives me important strength, continuous to allow me the resilience to achieve justice and help get me out of jail. And now we will continue to organize to win the appeal of my conviction. For that, we need you to extend your creative support to continue to raise money for our great legal team, to organize educational events about the case, and to prepare a mobilization from the Midwest to Cincinnati, sometimes in September, when we believe the oral argument on the appeal will be made. I'm doing well, very hopeful that we will win the appeal and continuing to organize on a daily basis with the Arab Women's Committee and the Arab American Action Network here in Chicago. We have many issues that need to be addressed, from massive budget cuts on the state level to the law enforcement criminalization of our and other communities. The main social question of the day in this country is the Black Lives Matter movement and the police crimes that we see perpetrated against Black communities everywhere. We support these efforts for police accountability and to end racial profiling, and the AAAN itself will soon be launching a youth-led campaign to stop repression against Arabs and Muslims as well. All of these issues are connected, and that is why the incredible activist and scholar Angela Davis will be in Chicago on June 28th to talk publicly in support of my defense and appeal of last year's unjust conviction. Thank you again for coming out tonight. I really hope to see you in September. And I now want to introduce my attorney, Michael Deutsch, who will give a prepared statement and then will answer some questions.
Thank you. Because everyone does not have brief we filed on Tuesday or the resources and time to read the brief, Rasmea asked me to give you a summary of the issues that we raise in our brief and then be available to answer any questions about that. We filed a 50-page brief on Tuesday of this week, and essentially the brief raises three issues in which we say the court erred in his decisions in our case. The first issue is the court denied Rasmea a complete defense. Under the Fifth and Sixth Amendments of the Constitution, a defendant has a right to present her complete defense. And in our case, Rasmea was not allowed to put forward her post-traumatic stress defense. She was not allowed to call an expert witness, Mary Fabry, who's one of the leading experts on torture in the world, who interviewed her, examined her, tested her, and determined that she suffered from chronic post-traumatic stress. And as a result of that post-traumatic stress, the expert would have testified that this would have affected how she answered the questions, how she interpreted the questions, to filter out or block the torture and what happened to her in Israel 40 years prior, and that when she interpreted the questions to only apply to the United States, she was not knowingly lying, but in fact answering them truthfully as based on her state of mind at that time. When the judge refused to let Mary Fabry testify, he essentially gutted the heart of her case because he would not let somebody help to explain and corroborate Ms. Odeh's defense, not knowingly lying, but she was answering the questions as she understood them based on her mental state at that time. In addition, the judge did not let Rasmea testify about her state of mind. She couldn't testify about the torture that she suffered back in 1969 and 1970 at the hands of the Israeli military and the Shin Bet. She couldn't testify as to the symptoms that she suffered for the last 45 years, including inability to sleep, flashbacks, a great amount of stress, all of these things which would have corroborated the fact that she had post-traumatic stress. And the judge basically said, since the statute which she was charged under was what's called a general intent crime and not a specific intent crime, she could not put on the defense. But in fact, she should have been able to put on the defense, and we argue in the brief that she was charged with a specific intent crime because she was charged with lying for the purpose of obtaining her naturalization, and under the law that is a specific. The judge was wrong in holding that she couldn't testify about her PTSD and deciding that Mary Fabry could not testify as well. The second main issue that we raised on appeal was that these documents that came from the Israeli military court should never have been allowed into evidence. These courts have been condemned by Israeli human rights, by Palestinian human rights organizations, by the United Nations, by all international bodies, that the military courts that are operating in the occupied territories use torture systematically against people. They don't provide you with the right to a lawyer until the eve of trial. You don't have the right to remain silent. And the judges are soldiers of the Israeli military that are carrying out this brutal occupation. So all these documents that were created by the military courts should not have been put before the jury, which said she was convicted, that she went to prison, that she was arrested and charged. And particularly, they should not have been used because they don't comport with the Constitution of the United States. The United States Constitution and the Supreme Court has consistently held that evidence based on be allowed to be used in the courts, and in fact, they should be excluded from any court proceeding. But in fact, what the judge said and what the government argued was there was a treaty between the United States and Israel to allow these documents in. But if you look at the treaty says nothing about the military courts of occupation. It says nothing about documents that were based on torture. It refers to documents in the Israeli civilian courts and not in the military courts. So the treaty should not have allowed these documents in. Beyond that, what we argue is that the documents themselves, which say that Ms. Odeh was convicted of bombings with intent to cause death and injury, which in names two people who were allegedly killed in the bombings, were irrelevant, highly prejudicial, and should never have been introduced to the jury. Even if they allowed some documents in, we had agreed to stipulate, because we weren't challenging the fact that she was convicted by Israeli military court and she was in prison. What we were saying was that she did not knowingly lie because she believed that the questions were about convictions in the United States and imprisonment in the United States. There was no reason for the court to allow these documents before the jury that said two people had died, and the names of the people, may their souls rest in peace, and many others were injured. This was highly prejudicial, irrelevant evidence that should never have been given to the jury. The third issue that we raised is that the sentence that she would receive was unfair and unjust and violated the principles of the sentencing statute. Ms. Odeh, as a result of her conviction, would have lost her citizenship. She's going to be removed from the country unless the conviction is reversed. And yet, on top of that, the judge sentenced her to 18 months in federal prison. And in making this sentence, he never considered her age, the fact that she suffered from PTSD, the fact that she had been horrifically tortured. Even the judge had found in earlier proceeding that he believed that her allegations of torture were credible. And yet, he totally ignored all those factors in deciding to give her an 18-month prison sentence on top of losing her citizenship and being removed from a country in which she has served for many years, helping the community in which she works. In fact, although he recognized that he had received letters from across the country asking that he be given leniency and that of her great work and how people have followed her work and tried to implement the work she's done, he didn't consider that in fashioning a sentence. He sentenced her to 18 months, which is the middle of the sentencing guidelines, which any person who violates the immigration law would be sentenced to. So he didn't consider the unique factors of her life, of her service, done for 10 years in the community in Chicago. So we believe that the sentence should be reversed, that she should get a new trial in which she can put on her complete defense, and failing that, she should be sentenced to no further time in jail. She spent 5 weeks, most of the time in isolation in a county jail, freezing cold, and that was enough punishment. What the judge said was there are other people out here looking to what the sentence would be, and if he doesn't give her a harsh sentence, then they will feel like they can lie when coming into the country. So we believe strong legal issues in the appeal, and we are hoping appeals will consider them and reverse her conviction. Do I just answer the question? Okay, I'm getting some questions, so I'm going to read the question and then I'm going to answer it. The first question is, can the appellate court uphold the verdict but reject the sentencing? Yes. The appellate court could say that the verdict should be upheld, but the sentence was harsh and unreasonable, and they either could sentence her to time served, which would be the 5 weeks, or they could send the case back to the judge to resentence her and direct that he consider her age, her post-traumatic stress, the fact she was tortured, and her work in support of the community. The next question is, how long will it take the appeals court to release its decision? If their decision is not in Rasmea's favor, can we take appeal to a higher court? What would that look like? It's hard to say. Once we have the oral argument, an opinion could come down within a month or within 6 months. It really depends on the judge's schedules and how much time they take in writing the opinion. It should be said that you don't automatically to oral argument. We've asked the court for oral argument, and we're saying that this is a unique case with unique facts, and it should definitely be argued orally for the court, and we're hoping that we will get oral argument. If we lose on appeal, we have two options. One is to ask for the full court to rehear the case, because you only hear the oral argument in front of 3 judges. The court is made up of 10 or 12 judges. So you could have what's called a rehearing en banc, which is the entire court. And the other possibility is you can try to get what's called a writ of certiorari to the United States Supreme Court, which they'd only take 2% of the cases that you ask to be reviewed. So it's a very difficult review, but it's possible that we could get a review in that regard as well. The problem we have, and people should know this, that if the Court of Appeals rules against Ms. Odeh, she has to turn herself in unless we get a further from the appeals court or the Supreme Court, which is probably going to be very difficult. So if we lose the case, even if we're trying to appeal to the Supreme Court, she probably, and if we don't get the sentence set aside, she will probably have to go into prison while we take further steps on appeal. Okay. What is the best case scenario for Rasmea? The best case scenario for Rasmea is to win her appeal and get her a new trial and have her expert testify at trial and convince the jury that she did not knowingly lie when she answered the questions on her naturalization. The next question is, applying for political asylum an option? And the answer to that is no. It is not an option under the circumstances that she has now. She's been convicted, and unless we can get that conviction turned aside, political asylum will not stop the conviction or stop the question. Also, because she should be deported, hopefully not. Where would she be deported to? Israel's not going to allow her to be removed to Jerusalem. Well, we don't know for sure. She has a Jordanian passport, and we believe that she should be, once removed, sent back to Jordan with her passport where she could live freely and travel freely. And we're hoping that if that's the scenario, that she'll be able to do that. Okay. How can people build toward your defense? The best way to people build towards our defense is to inform themselves of the situation, help raise money for the work that we do, and at some point we might have some kind of letter writing campaign, and we're working on figuring that out at this point. Question, do you need financial assistance? What is the most important thing we can do to help you moving forward? Yes, of course, we need to raise money for the legal expenses and the legal work. So whatever financial assistance can be gathered, that would be very helpful. And again, people should just be in touch with AAAN and the Rasmea Defense Committee as to further steps that can be taken.
This is the next question. If it's not applicable, it's okay.
The question is, can her conviction be thrown out on the basis that evidence was from an illegal occupation? Well, in a way, we're arguing that in front of the court. We're saying that the military courts that are in the occupied territories do not operate in legal, inconsistent with the U.S. Constitution or with the Bill of Rights or international law, and therefore they never should have been able to put in those documents against her. If we're successful in that, then she will be able to get a new trial based on that. What do we know about the It's the Sixth Circuit Court that may have a hearing on Rasmea's case? Well, there are 12 circuit courts in the United States. The Sixth Circuit deals with Ohio, Michigan, Tennessee, I think Kentucky. There are 12 different judges. Some were appointed by Jimmy Carter. Some were appointed by Clinton. Some were appointed by the first President Bush. Some were appointed by the second President Bush. And there were a couple appointed by Obama. So they're a whole mix of judges. Some are more progressive than others. We don't know what 3 judges are going to be sitting on the panel, so we can't really say anything generally about the court.
That's all we have right now. You can see, we'll wait a moment for another question.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming and listening, and hopefully we'll be back in touch with you about further steps that can be taken.
So I think your question is asking like who she is and how did this get started, right?
Yeah.
All right. I'll let you answer while I turn down the computer.
Oh, thanks.
You were there.
Well, I think current political issues, maybe, why they're targeting her now. A lot of it comes out of actually stuff that Tom's been targeted for. So I don't know. You're better to speak of that. I don't know.
Yeah, what kind of stuff are you targeted for?
Well, so back in, I'm part of a national anti-war group that is called the United National Anti-War Coalition. And that came around in about 2010. But prior to that, many of us in the Midwest especially, and some of us who belong to a group that's on my t-shirt, the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, we organized the 2008 protest against, 2008 protest outside the Republican Convention up in St. Paul, Minnesota. So we were able to get like 30,000 people to come to what we promoted as an anti-war protest. And it was really powerful. I don't know if you'll remember, but McCain was supposed to, well, he was nominated, but George Bush said there was a hurricane in Galveston, Texas, so he didn't show up. But really, we think they didn't want to face this large mass of anti-war protesters. And so it really had an impact on that convention. Whenever they showed it on the news, there was protesters on one side of the screen and, the dark forces of the Republican Party on the other side of the screen, So we had a good impact on that. And then a few years later in 2010, the people who organized those protests, our homes were raided, or myself, I was followed by the FBI at the same time the homes were being raided, because I said, well, I'm leaving the house to go write a press release, And so I hopped to it, and I left the house, and I realized, oh, someone's following me, and it was the FBI.
Yeah, that's here in Grand Rapids.
Right here in Grand Rapids. Yeah.
They followed you here in Grand Rapids too?
Yeah, that's where I was. I was driving around downtown, trying to find a cafe to do a press release, with Wi-Fi. And it was about 8:30 in the morning for us. But in Chicago, 28 FBI agents raided my friend's house. They took everything, boxes, 2 vans full of boxes with children's artwork, a photograph of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King that was on the wall of their house. And so they raided 7 homes in Minneapolis and Chicago. So we immediately said, they were saying we were in trouble for material support for terrorism, and that we could do 15 years in prison for it, and that we should talk to them and tell them about what we were doing. And so we all said no. It ended up being 23 of us. They wanted us to go to a grand jury. We all went and met with that lawyer and another lawyer, Jim Fennerty, and we all signed papers saying we refused to show up. They started to threaten that they would put some of us in jail for up to 18 months they don't call it force you to testify, but if you don't talk, then they want to put you away. And a grand jury, there's no lawyer for you. There's only the prosecutor and handpicked, I say handpicked grand jury because most people don't want to serve on grand juries, so it tends to be ex-military, ex-government employees or retired people. So it's kind of skewed towards a demographic of U.S. society that favors the courts and law enforcement and believes more conservative views. So we all refused to go, and we did a national campaign with lots of protests in 70 cities, and we kind of shut it down. We actually kind of beat it back. But they still say 5 years later that they're investigating us, and we're very open about our politics and who we are. We're not trying to hide from this, because we think the best way to fight it is to get the people on our side.
Right, it almost sounds like you need to file a lawsuit against them for violating you and just everybody.
So what happens if you want to do that is then you definitely have to testify in court.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't want to testify in court.
Because it can be held against you or what?
Because it will be turned around.
All be turned around.
That's what typically happens with her.
That's what happened to her. That's what happened to
So
her.
for instance, we travel to Palestine. People I haven't, but people I work with have. And we meet with trade unionists and school teachers and doctors and lawyers and high school kids. We meet with moms, women's committees that defend the rights of women in the Arab world. I traveled to Colombia. I met with trade unionists at a time when 3 were being murdered every week by death squads. So it's,
Colombia.
yeah, in Colombia. So it's very dangerous to go on these trips sometimes. But I don't want to share the contacts I made or who I talked to with the U.S. government, because they're the ones making the war happen there. They're the ones responsible for overseeing the death squads. And so I don't want them to have this information. So it's a good idea what you're
Part
saying.
of the war on drugs, isn't it?
That's
War
part
on
of it.
terror, war on drugs,
She's got it.
war is the problem. And it's like, I feel like we can't be anti-war anymore. We need to be for a different way, for something, because that's the only way to really, I don't know, I guess make something powerful happen. It's not to be against anything, but for something new.
Like for peace.
For peace, for working together, for diplomacy, for justice.
For friendship, it's that easy.
Yes, for
You know,
humanity.
Fox News interviewed
And the
me
earth.
after the raids and said, so basically you visit our country's enemies. And I said, yes, we have friends in every country where we go to visit who are just like us. They're teachers, they're
People.
workers, they're people. And so at the end of that, I said to the Fox News person who was in New York, I said, so yeah, I agree with you. We go to visit our friends. And then she was stumbling
She was
to ask
stumbling.
another question because she realized I turned it back on her. But that's the mindset we're dealing with. Homeland Security sees the people not of other countries as enemies, but the people in Ferguson and Baltimore as enemies.
in our own home.
The people who they raided, who say, we're for peace, we're not for war, spend the money
We're the
at
enemy.
home, quit spending it on the military, they come and raid our homes. When
Which
Wall
throws up a
Street,
red flag.
when Wall Street crashes the economy, nobody raided their homes.
No, we gave them money. we made trillions of dollars and just gave it to them and said, oh,
No big deal.
It's printed it. So what we're doing is we're standing in the wind, facing into the wind, saying, you're not gonna do that to us. We're not criminals, and you will not criminalize us. Then they went after, a year after that, 2011, they went after Carlos Montes, who's a veteran Chicano organizer and immigrant rights leader in LA. He helped us organize the protest in St. Paul. He was there. And they tried to get him on a felony.
Sure.
And we were able to make it so he didn't have any prison time.
Good.
And we have expunged his record. So he doesn't have those charges. And then they went after Rasmea. And at first we thought, well, Homeland Security are the ones who raided her home and took her and arrested her and questioned her. But then we saw in court that the prosecutor from the U.S. government who's in charge of our case was going into the courtroom and whispering in the ears of the prosecutors who Rasmea has had to face. Then in discovery, we found out that her case began because of the raids on our homes. And that's
What they
the
found.
connection. Right.
Yeah.
So then they said, oh, Rasmea is somebody we can get who's connected to these people and to this organization. And that's how it unfolded.
You know how they wiretapping you?
They're wiretapping you, they're
Everybody.
wiretapping the ice cream store
They got
woman.
Yeah,
cameras everywhere.
You know,
and the
it's-
highways are
it's the
televisions
NSA,
are
right?
now.
yeah.
The National Security Agency. Every single phone call, email, electronic communication,
Pretty cool.
every piece of mail is photographed in this country. Every single one.
So that's for everybody.
Yeah. So, welcome to the club. You're
Oh,
you're
wow.
with me.
Oh, I've been
You've been in the club before
I've been
me.
there.
You had the FBI over after you too in the past, haven't you?
Well, they wiretapped us during my campaign for mayor.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, they did
Wiretapped.
then?
And then they raided, we got raided, they took all my campaign material and locked it up. That was the city of Grand Rapids. And then we knew we were wiretapped because I called my brother to get some money, some cash to get a guy out of jail. He lives on Madison Street, so when I call him, the police officer pulled in front of his driveway so that he couldn't get out to bring the money.
So when I was pulled in by the FBI, one of the agents let my wife and I know that he had listened to our conversation on our cell phones. Because I called her while I was being followed. I went 20 miles an hour. That was the chase, the FBI chase.
Yeah.
20 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I'm not, ending up a victim of them. So, and I didn't know who it was. I assumed it was the FBI, but I didn't know for sure if they were, Anyway, but this FBI agent let us know that he knew exactly what we had said to each other on our cell phones. And in 2010, there was no public knowledge of the technology that could do that. And I was very aware that he was telling me exactly what I had said to her, word for word. And 2 years later, I read an article about Stingray technology, it's called, which allows law enforcement from a vehicle to track to cell phone.
Conversation.
Yeah, any conversation. As long as they know the
And then
numbers of
just
who they're
record.
targeting.
Or
Yeah.
listen,
No, it's all recorded.
dictate.
Was that through the NSA building then? Kind of like they get the 3 numbers and then
They
call
said
it
they
to
use
listen
cell
to these
towers
guys.
in the city to do it. So, and it's widely available now. But at the time, I didn't talk to people because I thought if I talk to people about that, they'll think I'm like a conspiracy, crazy.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Well, we were
So-
involved into a
something I
police
was-
state
I
anyway.
was wondering about Rasmea's case. Is the judge, Gershwin Drain, was appointed by Obama.
That's right.
What are his motives, or what's his, I'm assuming he's a Democrat, what are his incentives for ruling the way he did in case, or like supporting his own decisions?
Before I answer that, let me say the first judge was named Borman, and our lawyer, Michael Deutsch, went into court and presented evidence saying, you know, he politically, financially, and morally supports Israel, and that he's ideologically a Zionist, Judge Borman. You know, that he'll put the interest of Israel above everything else in his life. And Judge Borman denied it in court. We were there to watch it, and just out of hand, you know, he gave an explanation, but it was clear from the start he wasn't going to have any talk of this. But then when he went back, it came up in the documents he got from the Israelis, the, you know, secret evidence that we don't get to see in court, that in fact not only was he financially invested in Israel, but in the actual grocery store where the bombings took place. His family was invested in that chain of stores. So then he saw that he did have to step down, Judge Borman. But there's no chance of a fair trial with that going on. So then we had Judge Drain step into it next. And I think Judge Drain is long-serving, you know, aligned with the Democrats, like much of Detroit, you know. But the thing about Israel is the Democrats are bigger supporters of Israel historically than the Republicans were. And there's nothing like support for Israel that gets the unity of both parties in Congress, you know? And so Drain, like other people in government, has a career to keep in mind. And if he wants to advance, he has to side with Israel. And more importantly than Israel, side with U.S. foreign policy. Because it's the U.S. that really calls the shots.
It's the U.S. that really controls Israel.
Yeah, it's not some lobby or something. The U.S. wants Israel as its you know, guard dog in the Middle East.
We're the ones that put him into power in 1948. The U.S.
What Churchill?
Huh?
Churchill,
yeah, in Britain.
In Britain.
Yeah,
Britain
Churchill had more than Britain.
Initially, yeah.
Initially, Britain did, yeah, but.
And that's where ISIS is, right?
In the Middle East.
In the Middle East, but not necessarily, no.
But sometimes I don't think it matters who's in control, Democrats or Republicans, because Obama's sending 500 advisors into Iraq, and they're talking about establishing more military bases there now.
Wow.
It's just, is it
It's a game.
how much different is that than when Bush went into Iraq?
Well, actually, there's nowhere to run except for just mess with the people that's trying to do peace. But there's nowhere to run. You know, on either side, you got the same type of cave-in and capitulation. And so the only thing that is what people are doing is let's mess with the peaceniks, just like back in the day when they messed with the beatniks, or back in the day when they messed with the peace and love people. Same thing. So you got the same scenario going down. People that always wanted peace. Peace is always unpopular because war is connected to finances. War is connected to business growth.
Profit.
Yeah, profit.
Profit.
Well,
It's like a value
Yeah.
has to change.
No.
Yeah, that's
It's
the
about
value.
valuing
Thank you.
profit and valuing human potential and
Yeah.
human value.
Yeah.
It's, human life
It's
is
a-
so beautiful and creative.
It's a flipping of values with that you're not going to change right now.
It's going to take time.
You know, I mean, Occupy had the prima facie potential to change the world, but I don't know what happened to it.
brewing.
Well, you said what happened to them.
Yeah.
They faced repression.
Yeah,
There were 3 organized waves of repression from Homeland Security and the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
They
And
sure.
the sharpest place was in Oakland, California, where, I don't know if you remember, they shot a gas canister and hit an Iraq war vet in the face.
Oh, really?
And knocked him out. He was in the hospital for a while. You know, they have no, they're not going to put up with urban rebellions and organized movements. And, you know, I think the next repression is going to be against the, you know, the Ferguson and Baltimore, the growing African American movement against police repression.
Yeah, I don't know where that's going.
It's not going to just be the local police forces who are trying to figure out how to buy off sections of that as well as repress other sections of that movement.
It's so strange.
They're meeting and planning to organize how to get it put back in the bottle, you know?
I try not to talk from behind the camera, but I just can't help myself because I'm wondering if there's any point in talking points of law, or if you collectively or Tom think that, you know, the law is just a fixed game, that you know, like once upon a time torture was considered a means of acquiring something that poisoned the result, you know, poisoned fruit. In this country, we've had this idiotic show, 24, is that the name of it, where a guy tortures people to get vital information that he can act on. But, you know, police torturing somebody to get a confession, you know, that's just, you never know if that's just he's trying to get a promotion or something. You know, it's just either way, torture should be excluded, but it doesn't seem to be anymore. When did that happen?
Well, all through the 70s and 80s, there were police torturers in Chicago, where I'm originally from, and John Burge is the most well-known torturer. And it really didn't get exposed until the 90s, and then he was given retirement, and, you know, eventually he was found guilty of something else, but, you know, hardly punished for being a torturer. And then, you know, we have the Guantanamo prisons that are still going. I would say that the Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, I call it the Guantanamo of the Rockies. People are in solitary confinement for years on end, which the UN defines as torture after about 3 months. Maybe it's not even 3 months, but people are living in solitary confinement in prisons all across this country.
They're not sure how much, I heard yesterday, it's they estimate 55,000 people
Really?
in solitary.
Yeah, that's really.
And even in Chicago, isn't there that warehouse that's just randomly not on the books?
That's right,
People
on
get taken to?
the near west side is how I would describe it, but it's just south of the Eisenhower. So police would off the books take people they had arrested to this warehouse and chain them to radiators and railings and leave them there. And who knows what they did to some of them, but it's being exposed now. So
Yeah.
It wasn't right, it wasn't moral, it just doesn't make sense.
It really
It's
don't.
mean.
To think that we're in a country where everyone talks about the rule of law, you know, it don't make sense if we espouse the rule of law. Don't make sense.
There's a lot of liars out there espousing
There's a lot
what's
of
convenient for them.
Yeah.
Well, something that comes to mind that I think about when you ask that question is like, and you know, most of what I know is labor, and union topics. And studying, doing a labor law class, we went over case by case, and this professor just showed how like it wasn't that like there's so much support for labor and there's so much support for unions, like even, you know, people all picketing and you know, big clashes between the cops or the paid like private police of a company coming in and just breaking a strike. And then the different situations would be brought to court, and you'd think, oh wow, this is the best situation ever, and they lose, and ultimately it came down to, all right, yeah, there's maybe a jury that is leaning on one side or another, but it came down to an illogical perspective for the judges. And most of the cases, they illogically used and justified cross-state transactions for saying that it would impede the free market. So, and for that reason, they would judge against.
One time I came back from Europe from a conference I attended, and I got, as soon as I got off the airplane, the Homeland Security people were there waiting, and they took me to question me, and I told them my name and where I visited, and you know, I feel bad because I answered 4 questions and I should have just answered 3. But after that, I said, I'm happy not to answer any more questions. And they were so startled, you know, because I asserted my citizenship rights. You don't have to answer their questions, you know.
Yeah.
And then you start saying, am I free to go? And they say, no, you have to sit down. We're holding you, you know. So I went and I said, okay, thank you, and smiled and sat down. And then they called me back and they tried again. I said, I'm still happy not to answer your questions. They said, you're so angry.
At that point, you're under arrest.
They said, you're so angry. I said, I'm happy not to answer your questions. But then they said, oh, we can keep you for 3 days. You know? And I thought, oh, that'll be terrific, because then my wife will actually come to Chicago to pick me up. And about 25 of my friends will be outside picketing when I walk out the door, so I get to see them all. Because they're not going to hold me for 3 days. They don't want to protest at O'Hare Airport, you know. So we have power on our side, is my point. And we have to organize ourselves, and we have to get together, and, you know, like all the different groups when we had that meeting about boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. Yeah. You know, I would guess there were 10 different denominations of churches, and some union members, and academics, and a few lawyers, and we had people from all these other kind of groups and institutions that we can organize, and it becomes powerful if we get together and do it together.
We can vote like that, you know, which would become powerful.
Going off Chuck's question about, well, if the legal system's rigged, how do you fight it? And off of what you're saying, which is, you know, if they know what outcome they want, how do you oppose that outcome? And what I'm saying, there is an answer, and the answer is to build a movement. And I see elections as part of that, but I really deeply believe that it's the movement itself that needs the most attention and focus. You know, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, you know, gay and queer movement, women's movement. We have to build all of those, and while they're separate in some ways, when they're moving, they start to unify.
Don't you
more
think
and
that
more,
right
you know?
now, with everything that's going on, that's what's happening? Is there's going to be a rise in these movements again?
Not only do we think that, but the U.S. government and Wall Street think it, and that's why they're preparing for more repression using police and military. They're just, the National Guard was holding you know, like a, what do you call it, like a military test in an old building in Flint, Michigan last week. They got caught. You know, the public figured out they're in there preparing for urban insurrections. You know, so they know. They know they're using our tax money to prepare this repression.
Particularly in Flint.
Yeah. You know, so Flint has empty buildings. That's where they practice. You know? So, but if we build the movements, I think we'll find that we can defeat the repression, and that's what the story of the Anti-War 23 is.
Peaceful.
It's the story of Rasmea, because we were able to get 200 people to march outside of her sentencing. Most people in her situation would not just have 18 months, they might have decades. There's like 300 Muslims in the U.S. now who are in prison for decades, much of it for free speech or because they were set up by the FBI, you know. They run these things as if they're like plays. They do it again and again, using informants like they used a spy in our anti-war groups. For 2 years, this woman was inside our group trying to set us up for a federal crime that would be a terrorism crime.
How did you figure out
Well,
who she was?
it took time, but she became more suspicious over time to us. And she started trying to get us to take money to send to groups in Palestine that are on the U.S. list, right? And we were like, we don't do that.
You gotta watch the money.
That was the main way. You can read about it at Stop FBI. There's two things on stopfbi.net. One is one of the agents left the whole plan for the raids in Minneapolis in someone's file drawer. So we published it about 6 months after the raid. So it says how many clips of ammunition an agent should bring with them to raid the house of an anti-war leader. Right? So it's a very detailed and interesting document. It has 110 questions about the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. That's what it's about. Are you now or have you ever been a member of this organization? That's a question in there. And you can go read it. We published it. And then we got the affidavits that the judge used to allow the raids to happen. And those explain very clearly how the spy interacted with us. And it also explains what kind of people we are. You'll see there's a wide variety of us. We're not all the same kind of profile, And I think it's interesting reading through. But if we build a movement, we can kind of push this repression back and sometimes even defeat it. And that helps us to grow stronger and attract more people over time. So the next thing for Rasmea is this appeal is in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is, it's a bit of a drive, but I'll plan to drive down there the night before the appeal. And
When is the appeal?
In September, we believe.
September what?
We don't have a date yet.
Oh, you did. Okay.
But if we can get, I used to live in Cincinnati for a few years, so we're going to try to get like some churches to help us and provide housing for free, or we'll figure out if activists will put people up, or we'll find a hotel if nothing else. And we plan to try to mobilize even more people than we did to Detroit, because we think people in the South and the East Coast will come up too. Like we know tonight there were 4 events in Florida, and people in Miami said they'll drive up to Cincinnati to meet us, which is far, but it's good. Minneapolis people are committed to drive, 13 hours to Cincinnati. So, and then Rasmea, we raised $100,000 before her conviction, and we spent it all because we would get all the women on buses
Do you have any people
from
in
her
Toledo?
work, There's people in Ohio, I don't know about Toledo.
We need Toledo is like...
We need Holy Toledo on our
Yeah,
side?
we do, because Toledo is a bigger community.
Yeah, absolutely. But a lot of Arabs and Muslims are afraid to come out. They're intimidated and afraid. Yeah, frankly, we have to do some work, but all the women that Rasmea works with and the kids who she's influenced their lives, some of them are in college, they're all organizing in Chicago. We're trying to raise another $100,000 to pay for the buses to go to Cincinnati, put people up, and I think we'll do it. I think we'll do as well as the last time in Detroit, And it's exciting to go see it, Homeland Security has all their vehicles out there for you to marvel at, how high-tech an SUV can be, and think about where your money's being spent instead of in this community right here, So.
There's this, I forget where the school district is. It's in Michigan. They can't afford to pay their teachers their wages right now. I heard that on NPR yesterday. Thanks. So,
Thanks for coming, everybody.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for putting it together.
Why don't we didn't introduce each other at the start, so I'll start and go to my right. My name's Tom Burke. I met you. It's nice to meet you.
Kim McKeon, Johanna, Susan.
I am
Matt Bear.
Rich Visser.
Paul Mayhew.
Chuck Miller.
And Chuck's gonna make a TV show out of this for us.